The silence was the first thing I fell in love with. It was a deep, resonant quiet that you can only find miles from the city's ceaseless hum. A silence so profound, it felt less like an absence of sound, and more like a presence of peace. Here, in the rolling hills of what developers had christened Starlight Meadows, the night was a velvet curtain, punctured only by the diamond-sharp light of distant galaxies. For an astronomer, it was paradise. I had spent 6 months searching for this exact combination: a clear, dark sky, a solid bedrock foundation for my pier, and enough distance from my neighbors to ensure my work wouldn't disturb them, nor they, me. My name is Dr. Elias Vance, though in this new life, I intended to be just Eli. For 20 years, my world had been the hushed halls of academia, the faint whir of server fans, and the cold, thin air of mountaintop observatories. I was an astrophysicist, and my work studying the atmospheric composition of exoplanets required a unique kind of solitude. After securing a major grant for a multi-year, remote observation project, I had finally been given the chance to build my own research-grade facility, a small, private haven for my science. This house, this plot of land, was the culmination of a life's dream, a chance to bridge the two halves of my life, the rigorous, isolated scientist, and the man who craved a simple, quiet home. The conflict was that I wasn't sure those two people could coexist in the same place. The house itself was modest, but the backyard was a perfect, gently sloping acre. The centerpiece of my plan was not a swimming pool or a fancy deck, but a small domed structure at the far end of the property, a roll-off roof observatory. It was designed to look like a tasteful, modern shed, but inside it would house a custom-built, 24-inch Ritchie-Chrétien telescope, its primary mirror ground and polished over 3 years to a level of precision that bordered on the fanatical. This instrument wasn't a hobbyist's toy. It was a unique scientific tool, the key to my entire project, and in a way, an extension of my own senses. I was supervising the pouring of the concrete pier, a massive, vibration-dampening column that was anchored directly to the bedrock 10 feet below, when she made her first appearance. A silver luxury SUV crunched to a halt on the gravel of my new driveway. A woman in her 50s, dressed in a sharply creased business suit that seemed out of place on a dusty construction site, stepped out. Her blonde hair was coiffed into an immaculate, unmoving style, and her smile was wide, bright, and completely devoid of warmth. "Welcome to the neighborhood," she chirped, her voice carrying an edge of synthetic enthusiasm. "I'm Brenda Miller, Starlight Meadows Realty. I sold you this beautiful property. Remember? And I'm also the president of our homeowners association." "Eli Vance," I said, wiping a dusty hand on my jeans before shaking her perfectly manicured one. "Nice to officially meet you." Her eyes bypassed me, immediately fixating on the construction work in the backyard. The smile on her face faltered, replaced by a flicker of sharp, appraising concern. "And what is this, exactly?" In my 20 years in corporate logistics, I learned that any project's success hinges on strict adherence to the initial plan. This foundation wasn't on the plot plan I saw. "An observatory," I said, a note of pride in my voice. "For my astronomy work. It's going to look like a simple shed with a special roof, all designed to be very discreet." The word observatory seemed to land like a stone in the placid pool of her worldview. Her expression tightened. "A shed," she repeated, her tone flat. "Mr. Vance, Article 9 of the Starlight Meadows Covenants, conditions, and restrictions is very clear on outbuildings. They must be of a design and color that is in complete aesthetic harmony with the primary residence. All plans must be submitted to the Architectural Review Committee for approval." Of course, I said agreeably. I have the plans right here. My architect made sure they met all the local building codes, and the design is very clean and modern. It will be painted to match the house trim. I handed her the rolled-up blueprints. She unfurled them, her eyes scanning the technical drawings with a look of growing disapproval. She wasn't seeing a carefully designed scientific facility. She was seeing a deviation from the norm, a variable in an equation she had already solved. A domed roof, she sniffed, tapping the drawing. That's not in harmony with anything. It's unusual. And the CCNRs state that all structures must maintain the traditional residential character of the community. This is a serious issue, Mr. Vance. It's a standard observatory design, I explained patiently. The dome is necessary to protect the instrument. I assure you, from the road, it will be barely visible behind the house. Barely visible is not invisible, she snapped, her voice losing its cheerful facade and taking on a hard, metallic edge. I am the top-selling real estate agent in this county. Mr. Vance, I have built my career on maintaining the prestige and value of properties like this one. An unusual structure like this. It lowers the curb appeal for the entire neighborhood. It's a threat to everyone's investment. Her words hinted at a deeper anxiety, a fear that went beyond mere aesthetics. It was the fear of a system losing its perfect, predictable order. She rolled up the blueprints and thrust them back at me. The Architectural Review Committee, which I chair, by the way, will need to review this. And I can tell you right now, we are going to have a problem. You should have consulted the HOA before you ever poured that concrete thing. She turned on her heel, got back into her SUV, and sped off, leaving a cloud of dust to settle over the still wet concrete of my pier. I stood there, the heavy blueprints in my hand, a cold knot forming in my stomach. I had come here for the silence of the cosmos, to be left alone with my work and the stars. Instead, it seemed I had found a different kind of celestial body, a planet of petty tyranny. And I was caught in its powerful, unyielding gravitational pull. The observatory was completed 2 months later, a marvel of precise engineering. The building was painted a tasteful gray to match the house. The roll-off roof mechanism was nearly silent, and the entire structure was nestled behind a row of newly planted cypress trees, just as I had promised. It was built perfectly to city code, passing every inspection with flying colors. I had even, as a concession to Brenda, submitted a modified plan that replaced the small dome with a flat, roll-off roof design, which was more expensive and slightly less efficient, but looked more like a normal shed. I thought it was a reasonable compromise. Brenda did not. The first fine arrived the day after the construction crew left. $50 for unapproved alterations to landscaping. My crime was the planting of the cypress trees, which were not on the HOA's pre-approved list of foliage. The list, I discovered, consisted of 3 varieties of flowering shrubs and 2 types of ornamental maple. Anything else was considered a violation. I paid the fine and sent the committee a formal request to have the cypress trees approved. It was denied. This was merely the opening salvo in what quickly became a relentless war of attrition. A week later, another fine, this one for $100, landed in my mailbox. Non-conforming exterior finish. The architectural grade, weatherproof gray paint I had used was, apparently, not the exact shade of dove gray specified in Appendix C of the HOA bylaws. It was, by my measure, half a shade off. I repainted the entire observatory. The violations grew more and more arcane. The small, shielded red light I used on the exterior of the observatory door a standard feature to preserve night vision for astronomers, was cited as unapproved exterior lighting. The weather station I mounted on the roof, a crucial component for my atmospheric readings, was an unauthorized rooftop appendage. Each notice was delivered with a crisp, formal letter, citing bylaws in a font of condescending legalese. Each fine was slightly larger than the last. I was trying to be compliant. I truly was. My work required focus and tranquility, and this constant, nagging harassment was like a persistent, low-grade hum of static, interfering with my thoughts. My first step was not anger, but research. I spent an entire weekend with the 300-page book of CC&Rs, treating it like a dense technical manual, highlighting sections and cross-referencing clauses. I found, as I suspected, that much of the language was vague and open to interpretation, giving the board, and thus, Brenda, immense discretionary power. My next step was to call my personal lawyer, Sarah, who had handled the closing on the house. I explained the situation, the escalating fines, the seemingly targeted nature of the enforcement. "Eli, this is classic HOA overreach," she said, her voice calm and professional. "It sounds like you've got a board president with an axe to grind. For now, the best strategy is to comply and document. Pay the fines. Keep a record of every communication, every notice, every photo. We need to establish a clear, undeniable pattern of harassment. If it continues, we can send a formal letter demanding she cease. But we need a strong foundation of evidence first. Don't give her any legitimate reason to fine you." So I complied. I spent hours drafting letters to the HOA, filing the proper forms, and paying the fines promptly. It was maddening. My nights, which should have been filled with the quiet contemplation of the cosmos, were now consumed by the study of suburban property law. The conflict inside me grew. The scientist, who craved order and reason, was being tormented by a system that was arbitrary and irrational. At one HOA meeting, I tried to explain the scientific necessity of some of the observatory's features. "Brenda," I said, addressing her in front of the dozen or so residents in attendance, "the weather station is integral to my research. It allows me to calibrate my adaptive optics system to account for atmospheric turbulence. Without it, the data I'm collecting is significantly less accurate." Brenda gave a tight, dismissive smile. "Mr. Vance, we appreciate your enthusiasm for your hobby. But the rules are not suggestions. They are the very framework that protects our property values. If we make an exception for your appendage, what's next? Someone wants to put up a ham radio antenna, a satellite dish the size of a car. Where does it end?" Her use of the word hobby was like a needle. It was a deliberate attempt to trivialize my life's work. I felt a surge of frustration, but I pushed it down. Losing my temper would only play into her hands. "This isn't a hobby," I said, my voice low and even. "It's my profession. And this facility is a grant-funded research project in partnership with Northwood University." The mention of the university seemed to give her a moment's pause, but she recovered quickly. "That's a private matter between you and your employer. Here, in Starlight Meadows, you are a homeowner, subject to the same rules as everyone else." The board, which consisted of two of her close friends, voted against my appeal. The weather station had to be removed. I complied, moving the delicate instruments inside the observatory, which meant I had to open the roof every time I needed a reading. A clumsy and inefficient workaround. The Project Nightingale file on my computer, a meticulous record of every fine, every letter, every interaction, grew thicker. I had started it as a defensive measure, a simple record, but now it felt like something more. It felt like I was gathering intelligence for a war I hadn't asked for, but one I was beginning to realize I would have to fight. After the bureaucratic assault failed to make me surrender, Brenda's tactics shifted from the official to the insidious. The campaign of harassment escalated to minor, deniable acts of property damage, each one designed to disrupt my work and fray my nerves. It began one evening when I was preparing for a critical observation. A nearby star system, LHS 1140, was having a planetary transit, a rare event where one of its exoplanets passes in front of the star from our perspective. By analyzing the starlight filtering through the planet's atmosphere, I could gather spectrographic data that might reveal the presence of water vapor or methane potential biosignatures. This observation was time-sensitive and crucial for my project. I had spent the afternoon running diagnostics. The telescope was perfectly collimated. The cooling system for the CCD camera was running at a stable -80 degrees Celsius, and the sky was a perfect, cloudless black. As dusk settled, I powered on the observatory's main systems from my home office and began the final calibration sequence. Suddenly, everything went dark. The hum of the computers, the faint whir of the telescope's tracking motors, the climate control fans, all of it ceased. My first thought was a power outage, but the lights in my house were still on. I grabbed a flashlight and went out to the observatory. At the side of the building, nestled behind a bush, was the main circuit breaker box. The primary switch had been flipped to the off position. It was a simple, blatant act. There was no way it could have happened by accident. It had been deliberately shut off, disrupting hours of preparation and jeopardizing the entire night's observation. By the time I restored power and re-ran the cooling and calibration sequences, the transit window would be more than half over. The night was a loss. Rage, cold and sharp, pierced through my usual academic calm. This was no longer about paint colors or petty rules. This was a direct attack on my work, a physical act of sabotage. My first call was not to my lawyer, but to the non-emergency police line to file a report for trespassing and mischief. The officer who responded was polite, but dismissive. Probably just some local kids. "Sir, we'll make a note of it." It was frustrating, but it was crucial. I now had an official police report number, a piece of paper that elevated this from a neighborhood squabble to a documented crime. I emailed the report number to Sarah, who added it to my growing file. The next day, I installed a professional-grade security system. 4 high-resolution night vision cameras were placed at strategic points around the observatory, with overlapping fields of view. One was aimed directly at the circuit breaker box. Another covered the main door. The other 2 monitored the general perimeter. The system fed directly to a secure server in my office, recording everything in crisp 4K. As I was on a ladder adjusting the final camera, Brenda's husband, Roger, came out to collect their mail. He saw me and gave a weak, apologetic-looking wave. I had always gotten the sense that Roger was a passenger in the vehicle of his wife's ambition, not a driver. "Having some trouble?" he asked, his voice low, as if he didn't want to be overheard from his own house. "Just taking precautions," I said, my voice tight. "Had a power issue last night. Someone shut off my breaker. I filed a police report." The mention of a police report made Roger's face pale. He looked back toward his house, then back at me. She gets very passionate about the neighborhood," he stammered. "She used to be a big-shot logistics manager for a shipping company. Managed hundreds of people, a huge budget. They had a merger last year, and her position was eliminated. They forced her into early retirement. She was devastated. This HOA, this neighborhood, it's all she has left to manage. She sees that building of yours as a personal failure, a mark against her record. His words provided a crucial, tragic context. Brenda wasn't just a power tripper. She was a woman grieving a lost identity, a deposed queen trying to rule a miniature kingdom with the same iron fist she had used in the corporate world. It didn't excuse her actions, but it made them tragically human. A week later, a new form of sabotage emerged. I noticed the ground around the observatory's foundation was unusually soggy. Upon inspection, I found that the sprinkler heads along that side of her lawn had been re-angled. Instead of watering her prize-winning petunias, they were casting a fine, steady mist against the wall of my observatory, directly onto the sensitive ventilation housing for the climate control system. Constant moisture could short out the electronics, leading to catastrophic temperature and humidity swings inside, which could ruin the delicate optical coatings on the telescope's mirrors. I checked the security footage. At 2:17 a.m., a figure in a hooded sweatshirt, Brenda could be seen methodically moving from one sprinkler head to the next, carefully adjusting each one. The evidence was undeniable. I saved the video file, labeling it Sabotage, Event 02, and added it to the growing Project Nightingale dossier. I didn't confront her. I simply went to the hardware store, bought parts to build a small waterproof shield over the ventilation unit, and documented the expense. I was playing a long game. These acts of aggression were not just harassments. They were evidence. Each piece of footage, each receipt, each logged event was another stone in the foundation of the case I was building against her. A case that would be deployed not when I was angry, but when it was strategically necessary. Having failed to deter me with fines and minor sabotage, Brenda escalated her campaign to the court of public opinion. If she couldn't force me out with rules or disrupt me with damage, she would turn my own neighbors against me. Her weapon was the Starlight Meadows online community forum, a place once reserved for discussions about lost pets and recommendations for plumbers, which she now transformed into her personal propaganda machine. Her first post was a carefully crafted piece of insinuation, titled, "A Question About Neighborly Privacy." "Hello, everyone," it began, with a tone of manufactured concern. "I'm writing today about an issue that has been troubling me, and I know some of you have mentioned it to me privately as well. We all value our privacy here in Starlight Meadows. It's one of the perks of living away from the city. But what are our rights when it comes to observation specifically, from high-powered equipment? I'm sure it's all very innocent, but it makes one wonder what, exactly, is being looked at from that strange new building on Eli Vance's property. Food for thought." The post was a vile masterpiece of passive aggression. She didn't outright accuse me of anything, but the implication was clear and poisonous. I was a spy, a weirdo, a peeping Tom using my telescope to peer into their homes. The comment section lit up with the predictable mixture of paranoia and fear she was hoping to stoke. "I was wondering about that," one neighbor wrote. "It gives me the creeps." Another added, "My daughter's bedroom window faces that direction. Is this even legal?" Brenda replied to this comment with more feigned innocence. "That's a great question. Cindy, I'm looking into the city ordinances about it right now. We have to protect our children." I read the thread, my stomach twisting into a knot of anger and disgust. My lawyer, Sarah, had been adamant, do not engage. Instead, I took meticulous screenshots and forwarded them to her. She responded within the hour. "This is libel per se. Eli, she's accusing you of criminal behavior. I'm drafting a formal letter to the HOA board, not just to her, putting them on notice. We're creating a paper trail that shows they were made aware of her defamatory behavior and chose not to stop it. It establishes liability." The social atmosphere grew toxic almost immediately. When I went to get my mail, neighbors who had previously waved would now turn away or stare at me with open suspicion. I overheard two women talking at the community mailbox. And he's out there all night. What kind of person does that? The feeling of being an outcast, of being watched and judged by the very people I had hoped to live amongst peacefully, was profoundly unsettling. Brenda doubled down a week later with a new post, this one titled, "Strange Lights and Noises." "Several residents," she wrote, "have reported seeing strange red lights coming from Mr. Vance's property late at night, accompanied by a low, humming sound. I don't want to alarm anyone, but this kind of unusual nocturnal activity is often associated with, well, things that are not zoned for a residential neighborhood. I've logged a formal complaint with the HOA's records, but I urge everyone to remain vigilant." The strange red light was the dim safety light I used to avoid tripping in the dark, specifically chosen because red light has the least impact on human night vision. The humming sound was the telescope's electronic tracking motor, which was quieter than a refrigerator. She was taking the mundane, necessary components of my work and weaving them into a sinister narrative, transforming me from a quiet academic into a mysterious villain. The Project Nightingale file grew, now including screenshots of every post, every comment, documenting a clear and malicious pattern of public slander. My isolation deepened. I stopped going for walks around the neighborhood. I had my groceries delivered. My sanctuary was rapidly becoming a prison. This attack on my character was, in some ways, more damaging than the physical sabotage. It was an assault on my standing, my reputation, my right to a peaceful existence. I had a scheduled call with a colleague, Dr. Eris Thorne, my project supervisor. He noticed my distraction immediately. "Eli, you seem off. Is everything all right? The data from last week was a bit noisy." I hesitated, then decided to tell him. I explained the situation, the harassment, the online slander. Eris, a man I respected immensely, listened patiently. "Eli," he said, his voice serious, "this isn't just a nuisance. It's a threat to the project. And it's a threat to you. The university has a legal department for a reason. They exist to protect faculty and research. Have you spoken to them?" "Not yet," I admitted. "I've been working with my personal lawyer." "It's time to escalate," Eris said firmly. "This is no longer a personal matter. It's impacting university property and a federally funded grant. You need to loop in our counsel. Let them handle it. Your job is to focus on the stars, not on suburban warfare." His support was a lifeline. I wasn't just a lone homeowner anymore. I was a researcher, part of a larger institution, and that institution was about to be drawn into the fray. Having successfully poisoned the community against me, Brenda moved to the next phase of her plan, weaponizing official authorities. She had failed to stop me with HOA rules and had failed to intimidate me with sabotage. Now, she would try to use the power of the city government to shut me down. Her first attempt was a formal complaint filed with the city's Planning and Development Department, alleging that my observatory was a light nuisance. It was a brilliantly malicious move, as light pollution is a genuine concern for astronomers, and the accusation was designed to make me look like a hypocrite. A week later, a city official named Mr. Davies arrived at my house. He was a tired-looking man in his 60s, with a perpetually skeptical expression that suggested he'd heard every excuse and sob story imaginable. "Mr. Vance," he said, consulting a file, "we've received a complaint from a concerned citizen about excessive light emission from your property, specifically from the outbuilding in your backyard. The complaint alleges it's interfering with the peaceful enjoyment of the night. I was prepared. Mr. Davies, I said, the entire purpose of that building is to study the faintest, most distant objects in the universe. The single most important requirement for my work is the complete absence of light. My observatory isn't a source of light pollution. It's a victim of it. I believe you'll find this complaint to be entirely without merit. His skeptical expression didn't change. I'll be the judge of that, sir. I need to inspect the structure and see it in operation after dark. We scheduled his inspection for that evening. When he arrived at 9 p.m., I was ready for him. I first gave him a tour of the observatory, explaining the function of each piece of equipment. I showed him the baffles and shields designed to block stray light from entering the telescope. I explained how the interior was painted a specific shade of matte black to prevent reflections. I showed him the dim, red light-only illumination I used, and how it was shielded, so no light escaped the building when the roof was open. This is all very impressive, Mr. Vance, he said, still noncommittal. But the complaint was about exterior light. The only exterior light is this one, I said, pointing to the small, shielded red bulb by the door. It's a 5-watt bulb, and it's aimed at the ground. Now, I continued, if you'd like to see the real source of light pollution in this neighborhood, please, come with me. I led him to the telescope, which I had already powered on. I pointed it not at a distant star, but at the house directly across the street, Brenda Miller's house. I had him look through the eyepiece. The view was a blurry, washed-out mess. What you're seeing, I explained, is the image being completely overwhelmed by stray light. Now, watch. I went to my computer and engaged the telescope spectrograph, an instrument that breaks light down into its component wavelengths. A graph appeared on the monitor, showing a huge spike in the sodium and mercury emission lines. That, I said, pointing to the graph, is the spectral signature of unshielded high-pressure sodium streetlights and the decorative landscape lighting that many of my neighbors, including the complainant, use. That is the light that is interfering with the peaceful enjoyment of the night, my enjoyment. My facility is designed to be dark sky compliant to an astronomical research standard. It is, without a doubt, the single darkest property in this entire subdivision. Mr. Davies was silent for a long time, studying the graph. He was no scientist, but he understood evidence. He had come expecting to see a floodlit party shed. Instead, he was getting a university-level lecture on light spectroscopy. You've made your point, Mr. Vance, he finally said, a note of respect in his voice. This complaint is baseless. I'll be filing my report tomorrow. I'm sorry to have wasted your time. As he drove away, I saw the porch light at Brenda's house flick off, then on again. She had been watching, waiting for him to come and validate her claims. His early departure and the lack of any official action must have been a bitter pill for her to swallow. Her failure with the planning department only made her more desperate. 2 weeks later, she tried a different angle. The fire department showed up at my door. "Sir, we've received an anonymous tip about improper storage of hazardous chemicals," the fire captain announced, his team standing behind him on my lawn. "Hazardous chemicals?" I asked, completely bewildered. The complaint mentioned volatile compounds for lens cleaning and high-voltage, unshielded electronics that pose a fire risk, he said, reading from his notes. I realized what she had done. She had likely done a Google search for dangers in telescopes and twisted the results into a 911 call. The volatile compounds were my small, 1-ounce bottles of isopropyl alcohol and acetone, used for cleaning eyepieces. The same stuff found in most medicine cabinets. The high-voltage electronics were the telescope's main power supply, which was a professionally installed, UL-listed, and fully grounded system. Once again, I was forced to give a full tour of my facility, this time to a team of firefighters. They were professional and courteous, but the entire process was a humiliating waste of time and city resources. They inspected my cleaning supplies, my wiring, my fire extinguisher, and found everything to be perfectly safe and up to code. "Looks like a false alarm, sir," the captain said as they were leaving. "Sorry to bother you." This time, when they left, I didn't just feel anger. I felt a cold dread. She was escalating. Filing a false complaint with a city inspector was one thing. Calling the fire department with a fabricated story of hazardous materials was another level entirely. It was a pattern of behavior that was becoming increasingly unhinged. She was no longer just a nuisance. She was becoming a danger. I immediately called my lawyer, Sarah, and then, per her advice, I looped in the university's legal department. I spoke with their lead counsel, Evelyn Reed, a sharp, methodical woman who listened to my entire story without interruption. "Okay, Eli," she said when I had finished, her voice grim. "This has gone far enough. She has now twice, baselessly, mobilized municipal emergency services against you. This is no longer a civil matter of slander. It's a criminal matter of filing false reports. We have enough. It's time to act. We're going to draft a formal cease and desist order and a demand for a public retraction of her statements on the forum. We'll have it served to her by a professional process server. This is the final warning shot. If she so much as looks at you the wrong way after she receives it, we file the lawsuit." The legal machinery was finally grinding into motion. But I had a terrible feeling that for a woman like Brenda, a legal letter wouldn't be a deterrent. It would be a declaration of war. The cease and desist letter, delivered by a grim-faced process server, did not have the intended effect. I had hoped the official, legally binding nature of the document, complete with the university's letterhead and the threat of a massive lawsuit, would shock Brenda into silence. Instead, it seemed to have lit the final fuse on her explosive temper. The letter was not a shield. It was a red flag waved in the face of an enraged bull. Her campaign against me had been methodical and calculated. Her response now was pure, unadulterated rage. It happened 3 nights after the letter was served. It was a perfect night for observation cold, clear, and still. I was tracking a candidate exoplanet I had been observing for months, hoping to capture the final data set I needed to confirm its existence and atmospheric properties. This was the culmination of nearly a year of work. Around 11 p.m., I took a short break, leaving the observatory to go back to the house for a cup of coffee. I was only gone for 10 minutes at most. In my haste, I committed a cardinal sin of security. I didn't lock the observatory door behind me. I was on my own property, in my quiet sanctuary. I had let my guard down. When I returned, coffee in hand, I immediately knew something was wrong. The air in the observatory felt different, colder, and there was a smell, the faint, cloying scent of Brenda's strong perfume. My heart hammered against my ribs. I turned on the main lights, and my world shattered. The telescope, my beautiful custom-built instrument, was a wreck. The carbon fiber chassis was dented. The delicate electronic focuser was bent at an unnatural angle. But that wasn't the worst of it. The primary mirror, the heart of the telescope, the 24-inch, one-of-a-kind masterpiece of optical engineering that had taken 3 years to create, was destroyed. A heavy-duty wrench from my own tool chest lay on the floor beneath it. The mirror's protective cover had been thrown aside. A spider web of cracks radiated from a central impact point on the mirror's quartz surface. Its perfect, parabolic curve, polished to a precision of a few nanometers, was now a fractured ruin. The light of distant stars would never focus on its surface again. I sank to my knees, the coffee mug slipping from my hand and shattering on the concrete floor. A sound escaped my lips, a choked, guttural cry of pure anguish. This was not just damage to a piece of equipment. This was the desecration of a sacred space. This was the murder of a dream. Years of work, millions of dollars in grant funding, the irreplaceable data from my project, all of it was gone. Destroyed in a single, senseless act of violence. My training, my academic discipline, took over. Grief was swiftly replaced by a cold, methodical fury. I stood up, took out my phone, and began taking pictures, documenting everything. Then, I went to my office and pulled up the security camera footage. It was all there, captured in horrifying 4K clarity. At 11:04 p.m., the footage from the camera covering the door showed Brenda storming into my backyard. Her face was contorted in a mask of pure rage. She was holding the legal letter in her hand, waving it like a weapon. She yanked on the observatory door and, finding it unlocked, disappeared inside. The interior camera, which I had only recently installed, captured the rest. It showed her seeing the telescope, the symbol of her defeat and frustration. It showed her screaming, a silent, vicious tirade. It showed her grabbing the wrench from the workbench. It showed her raising it high above her head and bringing it down with all her strength onto the face of the mirror. The footage was irrefutable. It was a confession captured on video. I saved the clip. I backed it up to 3 separate secure servers, including the university's primary legal server. Then, I picked up the phone. My first call was to 911 to report the vandalism. My second was to Evelyn Reed. It was late, but she answered on the first ring. "Eli, what's wrong?" "She did it," I said, my voice hollow, devoid of emotion. "She broke into my observatory. She destroyed the primary mirror. It's a total loss." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Eli, are you sure?" "I have it on video," I said. "High-definition video. The police are on their way." I could hear the sound of furious typing. "Okay, Eli, don't talk to her. Don't engage. Talk only to the police. I'm calling Eris Thorne now. We are transitioning from a civil suit to felony criminal charges, and a civil suit for the full replacement value of the instrument. Do you have the most recent appraisal and insurance documents?" "Of course," I said. My hands were shaking, but my mind was perfectly clear. "Good." Evelyn's voice was like ice. "Because we are going to burn her to the ground." The time for warnings, for cease and desist letters, for patient documentation, was over. Brenda had crossed the final line. She had responded to a legal document with a wrench. She thought she was destroying a hobbyist's toy. She had no idea she had just declared war on a major research university and committed a felony that would not only bankrupt her, but would likely send her to prison. She had wanted to protect her property values. She was about to lose her own property, and everything else she held dear. The climax came, not with a bang, but with the quiet, rustling sound of legal papers. 2 weeks after the incident, Brenda called an emergency HOA meeting. The official reason: according to the notice she sent out, was to discuss recent security incidents and to vote on a motion to declare the property at 124 Willow Lane a chronic nuisance, requiring the removal of the non-compliant structure. It was an act of breathtaking audacity. She had been arrested the night of the vandalism, charged with felony destruction of property, and was out on bail. Yet here she was, doubling down, trying to use the very HOA she had weaponized to finish the job she had started with a wrench. She clearly believed she could spin the story, paint herself as the victim, and convince the neighborhood that I was the source of all the trouble. She had told her friends that I was trying to frame her, that the lawsuit was a bullying tactic. She was confident, arrogant, and completely unaware of the precise, multi-pronged legal and financial guillotine that was about to fall on her neck. I attended the meeting. I sat in the back row of the community clubhouse, a silent observer. With me were Evelyn Reed, the university's counsel, and a man from the university's finance department named Mr. Chen, who carried a locked briefcase. My personal lawyer was there as well. We were a quiet, grim-faced phalanx. Brenda stood at the podium, a portrait of aggrieved righteousness. She had dressed for the part in a conservative navy dress, a string of pearls around her neck. She spoke of her love for the community, her dedication to maintaining its standards and safety. She painted the night of the vandalism as a misunderstanding, a moment of fear. "This man," she said, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion as she pointed a finger at me, "has been a source of conflict since the day he arrived. His bizarre structure, his secret activities. I went to speak with him that night, to plead with him to consider his neighbors. I felt threatened, and I acted to defend myself. And now, his powerful university is trying to ruin me, to crush our little community under a mountain of legal fees." She then made the formal motion that my observatory be declared a nuisance, and that the HOA use its full legal power to force me to dismantle it. "It's time," she declared, her voice ringing with finality, "that we take back our neighborhood." Several of her allies in the audience shouted their support. She was about to call for a vote, her face flushed with impending victory, when a man in a courier's uniform entered the room. "Brenda Miller," he asked, his voice professional and loud. Brenda looked annoyed at the interruption. "Yes." "You've been served," he said, handing her a thick packet of documents before turning and leaving. An awkward silence fell over the room. Brenda stared at the packet, a look of confusion on her face. She clearly thought it was just another document from my lawyers. She scoffed, tossing it onto the podium. "More harassment from Mr. Vance's legal bullies," she said to the audience. "I suggest you read it." "Mrs. Miller," Evelyn Reed said, her voice cutting through the room like glass. She stood up and walked to the front. "That is not from Mr. Vance. That is from your insurance company. It is a formal notice of denial of your homeowner's insurance claim for legal defense. They have, quite rightly, concluded that an intentional criminal act is not covered by your policy. You are on your own." Brenda's face went pale. The first crack appeared in her armor of self-assurance. "Furthermore," Evelyn continued, "I think this is an appropriate time to present you with this." Mr. Chen stepped forward, unlocked his briefcase, and produced another, even thicker document. He placed it gently on the podium in front of Brenda. "What is this?" Brenda whispered, her voice suddenly small. "That," said Mr. Chen, "is the formal bill for the damages you caused. As the equipment was owned by Northwood University, we were, unfortunately, required to follow federal procurement regulations for its replacement. It is a line-item invoice." Brenda's trembling hands opened the document. The residents in the front row craned their necks to see. I stood up and addressed the room, my voice steady and clear. For months, Mrs. Miller has referred to my work as a hobby. Let me be clear. That hobby was a project funded by the National Science Foundation to search for habitable worlds. The instrument she destroyed was one of only 3 of its kind in the world. Brenda's eyes were scanning the first page of the invoice. I could see the color drain completely from her face. Her mouth fell open. The primary component, I continued, was a 24-inch custom-ground hyperbolic mirror, its replacement, which had to be rush-ordered from a specialized optics lab in Germany, costs $375,000. The carbon fiber optical tube assembly, which must be custom fabricated, is $42,000. The electronic focusing and collimation system is $28,000. The cryogenic cooling unit for the spectrographic camera, which was damaged when you knocked over the telescope, is $36,000. I let the numbers hang in the air, each one a hammer blow against her reality. When you add in the costs for de-installation of the damaged components, transportation, reinstallation, and the 9 months of professional recalibration required, the grand total for the repairs you are legally and financially responsible for, I said, making eye contact with her, is $512,450. A collective gasp swept through the room. It was a sound of pure shock. The sum was so immense, so far beyond the scope of a neighborhood dispute, that it seemed to suck all the air out of the clubhouse. Brenda stared at the number at the bottom of the page, her entire body shaking. Her face, which had been a mask of righteous anger just minutes before, had completely crumbled. It was now a canvas of pure, unadulterated horror. She looked up at me, her eyes wide with panic and disbelief. A single, choked sob escaped her lips, then another. The tears started to stream down her face, carving paths through her makeup. The powerful, untouchable HOA president was gone. In her place was a broken woman who had just realized she had made a $500,000 mistake. Her carefully constructed world of rules and property values had just been obliterated by the one thing she had never accounted for: consequence. The resolution was as swift as it was brutal. Faced with an ironclad criminal case, complete with video evidence, and a civil suit from a university with functionally limitless legal resources, Brenda's world collapsed. She pleaded guilty to felony vandalism and was sentenced to 2 years of probation, narrowly avoiding prison time only because it was a first offense. But the financial penalty was a life sentence. The university's civil suit was a formality. A judge awarded them the full $512,450 in damages. Brenda and Roger, their insurance having abandoned them, were forced into bankruptcy. Their beautiful house in Starlight Meadows, the symbol of her status and the kingdom she had fought so obsessively to protect, was sold to help pay the judgment. They were forced to liquidate every asset they had: cars, savings, retirement accounts. It wasn't enough to cover the full amount, but it left them financially ruined. She was stripped of her HOA presidency, of course, and her real estate license was permanently revoked due to the felony conviction. The woman who had built her entire identity on property values and professional prestige lost both in a single, self-inflicted blow. The community, horrified by her actions and the subsequent revelations, elected a new board, a group of reasonable people who promptly rewrote the most oppressive bylaws. 9 months later, the new mirror arrived from Germany. A team of technicians from the university spent a week installing and calibrating it. The day they finished, I stood in my observatory. The familiar, quiet hum of the electronics filling the space once more. That night, I opened the roof, aimed the telescope at the heavens, and captured the first photons of light from a star system 100 light-years away. The data that streamed onto my monitor was perfect, clean, and beautiful. The silence I had sought when I first moved here had finally returned, deeper and more profound than before. It was a quiet born, not of isolation, but of resolution. It was a peace I had been forced to fight for, a stillness earned in the heart of a storm. And as I looked up at the infinite, silent cosmos, I knew I was finally home,